What if I told you that Polk County, the fastest growing county in the United States right now, where everybody is moving to because of their beloved Sheriff Grady Judd, is nothing more than a radioactive wasteland? You're not going to want to miss the entirety of today's video because the information that I'm giving you is information that other journalists are going to be afraid to get into. On the news, Polk County is the fastest growing county in Florida, and Florida's governor is creating preserved land for the Florida Panthers, the endangered species. But there's an aspect of all this that nobody's touching on. Many journalists who know this topic are probably afraid to talk about it because of how much it encompasses. On today's video, you're going to get some answers about what's really happening in Florida that are probably going to be a little bit disappointing and hard to believe, but it is well accounted for and you can do your own research. I want to be giving you the links on today's video so you can do your own research and get your own answers. Let's get into this topic that nobody wants to touch. Florida's governor signs new laws purchasing land for the state of Florida for the preservation of Florida panthers. However, much of this land is being purchased in the Orlando area, an area that quite literally has no Florida panthers. Why is the state of Florida purchasing land in Orlando for Florida panthers when there are no Florida panthers in Orlando? The Florida panther is a protected species. Initially, it became to the brink of extinction due to the fact that it would go after the livestock of farmers, and thus farmers were trying to get rid of them. But in recent years, the biggest problem that the Florida panther has had has been crossing roadways where they are hit by vehicles. Out of over 600 recorded deaths of panthers in the state of Florida, only 3 have been in the Orlando area, so it doesn't seem like a logical place for this land to exist. On top of that, the land that the governor is designating for Florida panther habitat isn't Florida panther habitat because Florida panthers do not like to live in swampy areas, and that's exactly the type of land that is being purchased by the state. In other words, the state of Florida is buying this land, but it doesn't really seem like the ideal habitat for Florida panthers. And that would be because the ideal place for the Florida panthers to live are the same pieces of land that developers want. Places like the Golden Gate Estates, Lehigh Acres are dry upland pine areas, and that is exactly Florida panther habitat. So we can see the clear conflict of interest between the Florida panther and the habitat they actually need versus what the state of Florida is designating for Florida panthers. Given that the places that actually would work best for Florida panther habitat are also the ideal places for developers to build homes and communities. Thus, in reality, what the state of Florida is doing is that they're taking the real habitat of the Florida panthers, Collier, Henry, Glades, and Lee County, and building houses there, while telling people, hey, we're buying land in Orlando for Florida panthers when a Florida panthers never stepped foot in Orlando. So just so you, the viewer, can understand, what the state of Florida is actually doing is that they're destroying the real Florida panther habitat, while on the other hand telling people, hey, we're buying preserved lands for the Florida panther, but these preserved lands are in places where a Florida panther has never stepped foot. National headlines: Florida's governor is protecting land for Florida panthers. Reality: Florida panther habitat is being destroyed at a rate unlike never seen before. But let's pretend like panthers live in Orlando. And if you don't believe me, well, FWC actually has a map of where Florida panther deaths have been happening. Let's take a look at that to further understand the truth behind this article today. So this is the map from FWC of Florida panther mortality. You can see that the overwhelming population of Florida panthers is between Collier County, Henry County, and Lee County, with some in the Glades County. So way up here, you can see that there have been a few panther fatalities over the years, amounting to only 3 panther fatalities. This is the area right outside of Ponciana. However, you can also note that there's only been 3 panther deaths up in this area. You can see this is the northern range of the Florida panther. The northernmost, I think, is here on the St. John's Flagler County line. But for the most part, the core of the Florida panther population As you can see, each one of these dots represents a Florida panther mortality. And this is directly from FWC, Florida Wildlife Conservation. You can see clearly that the problem areas are Highway Daniels here in Lehigh Acres, 82 in Lehigh Acres. You can see coming out of Immokalee, Highway 29, Interstate 75, and I think it's 832 coming out of Immokalee to the east. As well, you can make out Golden Gate Parkway. That's the boulevard. Yeah, it's the boulevard, Golden Gate Boulevard, not the parkway. One's the parkway, one's the boulevard. But here's Golden Gate right here. You can see that's a problem road. And you can see that for the most part, there's mostly north to south collisions, which means that the Panthers usually don't move east to west too much, other than here along Highway 29. So the problem is areas are, for example, like right here, you can see on US 41, there's been 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 panther deaths right here on US 41. You can see over here on 29 a few. One of the trouble areas as well is off of San Marcos and US 41. You can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 deaths down here. This area here off of Marco Island, where US 41 heads to Marco Island, you can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. You can see 9 deaths. However, you can see that they're building houses. These are new communities going up right here in Naples. This new community, you can see they're building new houses right here. They're building literally new communities where there's been 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 Florida panther deaths. In fact, you can see they're building new communities here as well. So really, the state of Florida doesn't really give a crap about Florida panther habitat. If they did, they would be more concerned with buying land in Collier County. As you can see, there's been the vast majority of Florida panther deaths have been in Collier, Henry, and Lee County, some pushing into Glades. So why is the state of Florida buying land for Florida panther habitat way up here in Orlando where they've only had 3 deaths? Well, because up here, this is swampland, and this land here is marshy, swampy. You can see it's all cypress trees, so this land can never be developed. So the state of Florida doesn't really care about saving Florida panther habitat. If they did, then you can clearly see the areas of trouble being Lee, Collier, and Henry County, which all happen to be very fast-growing areas. In fact, you can see that they're actually building new communities exactly where Florida panthers have been killed. And that is because here in Naples, you have pineland. You can see these are pine trees here. Pushing this way, it becomes swampland. Okay, there's a lot of swampland in Naples, but there's also a lot of pineland, which means it's high elevation. Like in here, you can see it's high elevation, and they want that land for development. I mean, look all through here. You can see here on a golf course, there's a Florida panther that was killed. You can see here vehicular trauma on US 41, but they're building incredible amount of new communities in Florida panther habitat. So the problem that I have with this new purchase by the state of Florida, signed by the governor, is that it's very hypocritical to say that you're going to do something about Florida panther habitat when Florida panther habitat is clearly Collier, Henry, and Lee County, 3 counties that are growing tremendously, and they're even rezoning. For example, recently out here is Ave Maria. You can see that it's interesting. It's called Panther Run Golf Course, right? Panther Run Golf Club. It's right in the middle of Florida panther habitat. So what they're wanting to do is they're trying to build all these communities here in the Everglades in Florida panther habitat. You can see there's been panther deaths all through here. So they're building all these communities in Florida panther habitat, right? Look at how many panthers have been killed out here by Ave Maria. I mean, they're everywhere. But then they want to buy land all the way up in Orlando and turn it into Florida panther habitat land. That, for the most part, is swampland. Florida panthers, yeah, there's been a few Florida panther deaths here, but you're talking Interstate 4. This is a very, very big highway with a lot of traffic. It would almost make sense that being that this is kind of like a green area that panthers would come through here if they're heading north to south, right? You can see it on the map. So it would make sense for Florida panthers to be coming through here, but they're not dying See, the Florida Panthers, there's been no Florida Panther fatalities anywhere in this whole area. Look, the only Florida Panther fatalities have happened on the interstate. So when it's right across the interstate, then they die. So turning this area into a Florida Panther habitat would mean nothing because, one, there are no Florida Panthers here. And, you know, when they do die, they die crossing the highway. Turning this into a Florida Panther habitat will make absolutely no difference in panthers crossing the interstate. Pointless. This is absolutely pointless to try to turn all this area here. Here it is. There's no Florida. There hasn't been a single Florida Panther death in this area. For as far as we know, the Florida Panthers don't even exist in this area. In fact, let's see how recent these Florida Panther deaths were. If you click on it, this was on Interstate 4. It was in 2017. Okay, so in 2017, that's many years ago. This one was in 2007. That's a very long time ago. March 21st, 2007. And this one here was in 2022. So since 2022, there hasn't been a Florida Panther death anywhere in that whole area of Orlando. You know, it doesn't seem reasonable to me that that's an area of concern. When you look at this map, you look at Lehigh Acres, Florida, for example. There's been 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21. 21 Panthers have been killed. 22, 23, 24, 25, 26. About 30 Florida Panthers have been killed around the Crew Swamp. So what's happening around the Crew Swamp? Well, they're building around the Crew Swamp in all directions. Despite the fact that there's a huge traffic congestion in all the highways that go around the Crew Swamp that's leading to Florida Panthers being killed, the state of Florida refuses to build two vital highways, the extension of Bonita Beach Road and connecting Immokalee Road to 82. These would have to be elevated highways because it is Florida Panther habitat. In other words, these highways would have to be literally bridges across a swamp that would reduce bumper-to-bumper highway on Highway 82, 29, Immokalee Road, where Florida Panthers are being killed at the highest rate. In other words, one of the reasons why so many Florida Panthers are killed here is because it's bumper-to-bumper traffic day and night because there's not enough roadways. If there was enough infrastructure in Southwest Florida, then there'd be more open roads, which would lead to less Florida Panther fatalities. Did you notice how there are no Florida Panther fatalities inside of Lehigh Acres, Florida? That is because Lehigh Acres, Florida has a grid pattern. Well, most of these new communities that are being built are gated communities, and that forces all of the traffic into the major roadways. And that in turn leads to Florida Panther fatalities. So if you really wanted to address the problem of the endangered Florida Panther, a place to start would be, instead of zoning all this land for developers and gated communities, if you were to zone these areas as normal residential communities instead, then you would have a more evenly dispersed flow of traffic, which would lead to less Florida Panthers being hit on crowded roadways. I mean, take as an example the fact that the 3 Florida fatalities that have happened in the Orlando area have all happened in the same exact place on Interstate 4 near gated communities in areas that are wooded. That's exactly what you have in Southwest Florida. It's the same type of landscape, but you'll see that there's much less of that going on in a place like Lehigh Acres where you have an open grid pattern. But the state of Florida doesn't care about Florida Panthers. What they're really going after is helping developers. The clear solution to reducing Florida Panther deaths would be to have less gated communities, have more open grid patterns. If you were to build these elevated highways across a corkscrew swamp, you would then reduce the overall congestion on all the other roads, and that would lead to less Florida Panther fatalities. That, as well as not putting in more gated communities. But of course, the state of Florida really doesn't care about Florida Panther habitat. What they're doing is a cover story saying, oh, we're doing something about Florida Panther habitat, because in reality, Florida Panther habitat, like I said, is being destroyed at a rate never seen before because they're rezoning the agricultural land far inland, like around the city of Immokalee, and turning those areas into developments. That is contributing to the fact that SB 1718 has pretty much destroyed Florida's agricultural economy. By destroying Florida's agriculture, they can then rezone this agricultural land into housing developments, which is really the purpose of SB 1718, was to destroy Florida's agriculture so they can rezone agricultural land into new housing developments. That comes along with the ideology that the more preserved land you have around these developments, the less population density you have, the more attractive it is to sell those houses. But in turn, because those communities are always gated, it forces more traffic into the major roads, which in turn leads to more Florida panther fatalities, which goes to show that the model that the state of Florida is following is really just catering to the desires of developers and rezoning agricultural land, allowing them to build these massive gated communities, and then also turning many of the surrounding lands into preserved lands, which is what people who buy a new house want. All that leads to more Florida panther fatalities, and it's been proven. That's why exactly where the state of Florida is trying to make this land up there in Orlando be a preserved land is where you have the Florida panther fatalities, because of the model of basically highways, gated communities, and preserved lands all in the same places. A model that would work is to have less gated communities, more infrastructure, and less congestion around Lee, Collier, Henry, which is prime Florida panther habitat. The reason that's not going to happen is because it's also prime development land. During the last recession, a lot of people in South Florida were paying for their homes with their private dump truck business. The state came in and got rid of the private dump truck industry by making their own quarries, and instead of using private trucks, they got their own county trucks, and thus the state of Florida took thousands of people that were self-employed, left them unemployed, and then forced those people to go work for the county for an hourly rate. Now that mirrors SB 1718, is that now the state of Florida is doing the same exact thing. The state of Florida is destroying the agricultural industry to take those resources for themselves. And those resources are not the workers, it is the land. By destroying agriculture, they'll be able to rezone it into gated communities, and thus they'll be able to grab now and buy the land surrounding those communities and turn it into preserved lands. So we can see now that the state of Florida has for decades created a pattern of destroying the private sector to take the resources for state uses. It happened when they did their own quarries in the last recession, putting thousands of people out of work. It happened with agriculture of SB 1718, and moving forward into the future, the goal is the same, because during the dump truck period, many of those quarries, after they were done, were turned into preserved lands. Concerning, very concerning for the state of Florida, is that the state's using vocabulary like expanding Florida panther habitat to the north. Florida panther habitat does not expand to the north. Florida panther's habitat is Southwest Florida because it's warm, it's high, it's dry, and that is the habitat that Florida panthers need. Surprisingly, it's also the habitat that developers need. The reason this vocabulary is concerning because in Manatee and Polk counties, Mosaic has destroyed thousands of acres with their mining, and chances are the state of Florida is going to come in and say, hey, let's turn this into preserved land, let us micromanage, and now a huge liability caused by the private sector will become a state-run problem, and that is definitely concerning for the people of Florida. You got all the right players in place in Polk County, Manatee County for something like this to happen, to grab one of the largest mining operations in the entire country, one of the largest ecological disasters in the entire state, if not the entire country, and turning it into, well, state preserved lands, because this is the pattern that the state of Florida has. Inherently, there's nothing wrong with turning lands into preserved lands in the state of Florida. This is a great thing to happen for the state, but you have to understand that the motives for these preserved lands is to encircle the gated communities in the land that's being rezoned for single-family home construction. That always falls to the hands of developers. It never falls into the hands of the people. These developers always have HOAs, which means that they're always making money on the land, And people like me and you have no other option if we're moving to the state of Florida, or if we live in the state of Florida, but to land in communities that have HOAs, because the state of Florida is not creating any more single family home development. If they rezoned this agricultural land and sold plots off to the public, then it would make sense. But in the state of Florida, developers have a monopoly over the people, and the people of Florida cannot get acreage and land for themselves for single home development because developers always get their hands on it first, because there's nobody advocating for the people of Florida. There's only people advocating for the developers in Florida. And that means that living in South Florida in the future will include nothing but HOA communities, nothing but gated communities, more crowded, congested highways, and all that leads to the death of the same species that they are proclaiming they're trying to save. I don't know if you guys know this, but the state of Florida does not care about the environment. Environmental concerns are of the opposite party interest. When the state of Florida starts to talk about environmental concerns like they're doing a good thing, that is a red flag, because that is not their party's interest. Everybody in South Florida knows that the number one most destructive force that the Florida Panthers are facing is these new large developments far inland. And we're seeing that developers are getting permits and approvals for these projects more than ever before. And now with the crunch on affordability, they're trying to put all the working class poor people in places like Lehigh, Immokalee, LaBelle, far inland, further agitating the interests of the Florida Panther habitat. If you grew up in New York and Ohio, they can pull the wool over your head and fool you on this one. But if you're from South Florida like me, dude, we're not fooled. We know exactly what's happening. The rezoning of agricultural land in Collier County is the number one threat to the Florida Panthers. So don't tell me now that the Florida Panthers are going to move. We're going to expand the Florida Panther habitat. The Florida Panthers want to live in Naples because they got everything they need in Naples. They don't want to move to Orlando. Now we're at the point where not only are the people having to leave South Florida, now the Panthers have to move to Ocala too. Get the crap out of here, man. At what point are these people going to stop destroying the state? How far are they going to go with destroying the state? And how blind do the people have to be not to see what's happening? Not only are they forcing the people out of South Florida, out of the state, now they're even forcing the Florida Panther. The Florida Panthers are going to have to move to freaking Ocala and Orlando now too, aren't they? If this guy really gave a crap about Florida Panther habitat, the first thing he would do is rezone the farmland into preserve land. Of course, that's never going to happen. That's not going to happen because that land belongs to the developers. And it's the developers that are forcing the state to buy those preserve lands so that they can have less population density, because the less land is available, the more appreciation their communities are going to have, the more they can charge for HOA fees. That is why you're seeing car washes and storage units pop up everywhere in Southwest Florida, and a furniture store in Naples, Florida, on every single corner. You remember where they were building furniture stores in Naples? Furniture store, furniture store, furniture store. Those stores, none of them ever pulled a profit. The purpose of those plazas and now the car washes and all these storage units is to build the land. They want to build as much as they can because it artificially inflates the value of the property because there's less land available. So by rezoning a lot of this land into preserve land, they're making sure that there's less land available, which will lead to price appreciation in the communities that they're going to build. And that is the ultimate goal of these developers in having the state turn these lands into preserve lands, because the less land that's available, the more price appreciation they have. That's why in the state of Florida, you have things going in places that don't even make a lot of sense, because the ultimate goal is to do what they did in Naples, Florida, which is to build up every single intersection into a plaza. And even if those businesses fail, it doesn't even freaking matter. The point is, the more you build, the more the prices appreciate because there's less land available, and that is their ultimate goal. But newsflash, Florida Panthers are not going to relocate to North Florida because they can't afford South Florida. They're just going to freaking die. That is the real situation happening in the state of Florida. Don't for a second believe that these people give a crap about the environment. If they did, then those videos that we did in the Florida Keys showing how there's homeless camps on all those mangroves wouldn't exist. The reality is that Florida is being destroyed at a rate that at this point is unsustainable. I used to care about the environment in Florida. I'm at the point where I don't care anymore because I understand at this point the state of Florida is in the hands of developers and insurance companies, and they are out to get rich at the expense of anything. People, environment, Panthers, it doesn't matter what it is, nothing is going to get in their way. And the state of Florida is doing the bidding of developers and insurance companies, which is going to make life for me and you impossible. And for Florida Panthers, I don't think they're moving to North Florida. I think they're just going to freaking die. That is today's video. I hope you guys have enjoyed my rant on the real reason why the state of Florida is pretending to do something about Florida Panthers. In reality, there's nothing to be done in Orlando. If you're talking about Florida Panthers, the only thing that needs to get done is a moratorium on all new development in Polk County that is commercial. Commercial, I mean development. If they were plotting land for single-family home construction, it would be unnecessary in Naples. The Golden Gate Estates have more vacant lots than they do houses. There's enough vacant lots in the Golden Gate Estates for easily another 20 years. Lehigh, maybe another 30 or 40 years. LaBelle as well. LaBelle has plenty of single-family home places like Port LaBelle, Lehigh Acres, Golden Gate Estates. The problem with these places is that they're not given the infrastructure they need. Now, I know it sounds like I'm contradicting myself, but I'm really not. Because if the state offered more infrastructure, then that single-family home construction would happen on the empty lots that are right now plentiful in Port LaBelle, plentiful in the Golden Gate Estates, and plentiful in Lehigh Acres. But because there's no infrastructure or access to infrastructure, people that are buying new homes have to buy from the developers because they are big enough to build the infrastructure that the state of Florida refuses to implement. And that is by design, not by mistake. The reason I say that is because when I lived in rural Alabama, I had city water outside of city limits up a mountain. Do you know how hard it is to put plumbing lines up a mountain? As you can see, the state of Florida is nice and flat. It wouldn't be hard for the state to provide this infrastructure, but if they did provide the infrastructure, then they wouldn't be able to have you buy a new house from a developer. That's why the city of Naples is only now starting to enforce that infrastructure along the few neighborhoods that don't have it, because at this point, those developers are no longer competing with those single-family home developments. In theory, the entire state of Florida is rigged up so that developers can sell you those new houses. Just take a look at the situation going on right now with insurance in the state of Florida. If you're buying in the state of Florida right now, chances are you're going to have to buy a new construction, not an existing home, because of all of the crunches that are happening with the insurance world. One of the biggest concerns that I have with the state of Florida claiming that Polk County is Florida Panther habitat is that the vast majority of Polk County's southern end has been destroyed by Mosaic. This is a large mining company, and all the areas highlighted in red are areas that have been completely wiped off the face of the earth by their mining experiments. And it is really concerning that the state of Florida is trying to say that Polk County is Florida Panther habitat, because that land needs to be repurposed eventually, since Polk County is now the #1 county in Florida that people are moving to, and a vast majority of that county's landscape has been destroyed by a mining company. Even more concerning is that Governor Ron DeSantis, the same person who signed off the purchases of these lands in Polk County, Florida, is already making legislation to help these Mosaic type mining companies drop their radioactive waste on Florida roads. So if you're starting to see a connection between one thing and the next, it's because there is a connection. The same person who's now designating the purchases of preserved lands in Polk County is also making legislation that's going to help the mining companies dump their radioactive waste on the roads of that same county. If you don't see a connection there, you're freaking blind. Now, even scarier is the fact that most of that mining is happening for fertilizer production. And I'm not going to tell you the #1 country that purchases this stuff, but it doesn't make sense to move fertilizer halfway around the world. Those are really deeper topics that I would rather not get involved with on my YouTube channel. But if you want to do your own research of what's coming out of these mines, what countries are purchasing that material, and does it make sense for a country halfway around the world to be purchasing fertilizer from the United States when they have 50 sources that are closer, you can do that research on your own time. I'm not going to connect the dots for you on that one. I don't delete my comments, so if you want to go ahead and say it in the comments, you can say it. I'm not going to personally let it come out of my mouth, but there are some really suspicious crap going on with these mining operations here in Florida. We're not talking millions of dollars, we're talking billions of dollars that are involved in this operation. So if you think that Governor of Florida making preserve lands in Polk County, a county that's plagued with inherently this mining company's problems, as conflicts increase in the Middle East, you see the price of fertilizer go up. I can't connect the dots for you. Do your own research if you really care about the topic and you're concerned about this. I can't tell you. Jose from Southern Life doing real journalism that other people are afraid to put their hands in. Checking out. If I had to make a prediction for the future of Florida, I think we're going to see in the future radioactive wastelands being labeled as Florida Panther habitat and people building houses and places right next to those areas, thinking that there's some type of nature preserve, when really it's an absolute landfill of radioactive waste. But that is the way the state of Florida functions, and I'm just giving you guys my personal opinion.